Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to introduce Gloria Glantz, who was born Gittel Przepiórka in Węgów, Poland, in 1939, to a very large, loving family, which included many uncles, aunts, cousins, 2 older brothers, and grandparents. To save her life, her parents enlisted the help of a righteous Christian family. And by the age of 4, she was the sole survivor of her own family and extended family of almost 70 people. In her lifetime, Gloria, whose unique life circumstances necessitated her name to change 5 times, has lived in 4 countries and on 2 continents. Her journey to America was a very circuitous and unusual one, as she journeyed from being a hidden child to a blessed grandmother. In her professional life, as a teacher, she has made it a mission to see that the Shoah is never forgotten. She is the winner of a fellowship from the American Gathering of Jewish Holocaust Survivors, American Federation of Teachers, and Jewish Labor Committee to study the Holocaust and resistance. She is also the 2002 recipient of the Spirit of Anne Frank Outstanding Educator Award. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Gloria Glantz.
I am honored to give testimony to you today. I am giving testimony, not telling a story. I am making you witnesses that this really happened. Manya Altman, Lelka Birnbaum, Alexander Horniman, Jacqueline Morgenstern, Leah Kliegerman. These are the names of 5 children who were hanged in the cellar of the Bullenhauser Dam School near Hamburg, from hooks on a wall. The first child was so light from disease and malnutrition that the rope would not strangle him. So the SS corporal had to use his own weight to tighten the noose. Then he hanged the others 2 at a time from different hooks. Like pictures on a wall, he would later say. 5 children, each a reminder of the efficiency of the Holocaust. It takes only about 15 seconds to read their names. But to read the names of all the victims, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, would take 3 years and 7 months. 3 years and 7 months, that is the time that elapsed from the building of the first gas chamber in Chelmno to the release of the last survivor. The time it took to kill 6 million Jews and 5 million Romanis, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, dissidents, people with disabilities. 3 years and 7 months, the time it would take just to read their names. These statistics were given by Prime Minister of Sweden, Göran Persson, at a Stockholm meeting in 1998. If you could listen to those names, you would hear about 70 names belonging to the Przepiórka family, my family. Grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. You would hear the name Mendel Przepiórka, my father, Esther Przepiórka, my mother, Zelig and Yitzhak Przepiórka, my 2 older brothers. Miraculously, my name, Gittel Przepiórka, is not among them. When I think about that time in our history, I am catapulted back to a little town, a shtetl, in Poland called Wegrow, when my name was Gittel Przepiórka and where a woman with a beautiful voice was singing lullabies to me. That woman is the person who gave me my love of music and my soprano voice, She was my mother, Esther Shapurka, who never reached her 40th birthday. Poland, September 1st, 1939. German soldiers invade Poland and occupy the country within 3 weeks. Jews have to step off the sidewalk for any German passing by. All Jews over the age of 12 have to wear an armband with a Star of David on it. My older brother Zelik has to wear one. The Germans closed all the synagogues for Yom Kippur. On this, the holiest day of our calendar, they rudely removed the chief rabbi of Wegrow, Rabbi Jacob Mendel Morgenstern, from his home, ordered him to put on his velvet hat, his robe, and his prayer shawl, his talit. And they dragged him to the open marketplace where the horses and the wagons were. And there they shoved a broom into his trembling hands and said, "Sweep. And when you're done, put all the debris and the horse manure in your velvet hat and bring it to the dump." When he finished cleaning the entire marketplace, he was ordered to undress. When he removed his prayer shawl, a soldier pierced him with a bayonet. That was the last rabbi of my town. Wegrow was a small town known for its tanneries. In 1940, the Jewish population was about 55% of the entire town. And Jews had lived in this town since the 1600s. By 1944, the percentage of Jews was 0. My father, Mendel Shapurka, and one of my 5 paternal uncles had a small but thriving leather factory in the center of town where they made the upper parts of boots and shoes, and our family lived nearby. My father was one of 10 children born to my grandparents, Rachel and Pinchas, and my mother also came from a large family, but they lived in another town. And I was born when my brothers were already about 8 and 10 years old. So you can imagine how I was treated like a little princess. My only baby picture, my 2 brothers are behind me. My mother was a teacher by training and had a beautiful singing voice, and I would beg her at night when she sang to me not to stop. I wanted to fall asleep to her voice. I played hide and seek with my brothers, Yitzchak and Zelik, and I always got the best hiding place, under the bed, because I was the only one that could fit under the bed. Our home, it turned out, was very conveniently located for the Nazi plan. We were only about 12.5 miles from the death camp Treblinka. So hiding was soon to cease being a game and had to become a method of survival. I think I have a slide of Treblinka. This is Treblinka today. 17,000 jagged rocks, each representing a Jewish community that was destroyed by the Nazis. And my son went with me in 2005, and that is the stone for my town, Wegrow. One cold, dark night in 1942, I walked through the woods with my mother. We stopped at a farmhouse where an unfamiliar woman welcomed us. My mother was carrying a cardboard suitcase of my belongings and a warm down comforter, because Polish winters are very, very severe. If you can think of the coldest day that we have had here, it would probably be the warmest day in Poland. My mother told me gently I had to stay here with this woman. "And you too, Mama?" I asked. I was 3 years old. My mother shook her head and began to head towards the door. I began to scream and grab her coat. I clutched her knees. I wanted to follow her out the door. But I was restrained, and my mother walked out, quickly closing the door behind her. The kindly woman tried to comfort me. "Don't cry. You'll have a glass of warm milk, you'll take a warm bath, and tomorrow you'll be a big girl." The next morning I woke up with swollen eyes and asked, "Am I a big girl yet?" I had to become a big girl very quickly, for that was the last time. Is this still working? Okay. That was the last time that I saw my mother. This is my matka. Matka is the Polish word for mother, and that's what I called her. Recently, within the last 3 years, I sent to the International Tracing Service, and I got this document. The reason I'm showing it to you is that it's in German. It lists my father's death date. Anfang 41 umgekommen. Umgekommen means died, but actually I think he was murdered. And the reason it's important is that I went to my matka, my mother brought me to my matka in 1942. All along I had been thinking that both my parents made this decision together. However, it's obvious that my father was already gone a whole year when my mother did this. 3 children, no livelihood. She had to take me by herself because my father was already gone. And I just found this out about 3 years ago. The woman, Mrs. Kowalczyk, was soft-spoken, kind, and patient. But of course, there were days filled with loneliness and longing. I seldom smiled, cried a lot, ate very little. I missed my mother's lullabies. I missed the laughter of my brothers, my father's tickling smell of leather on his hands. But as time passed, the memory of my own family began to fade. My mother's singing, however, has been imprinted in my heart and on my own voice, and has remained a blessing for me all my life. This is approximately how I looked when I went to my matka. I got a new name now. Instead of Gittel Shapurka, a Jewish name, I now became Gucia Hanusha Kowalczyk, named after her. And she helped me get through the dark days. Unlike others at the time, I had no deprivation physical. I had enough food to eat, I had a warm bed to sleep in. There was a vat of fresh warm milk in the room where I slept. And one day, I had even seen the cow being milked. One day I asked my matka for a glass of milk with my kielbasa sandwich. And she said to me, "You can't have milk with kielbasa. You're Jewish, but don't tell anyone." So here was this staunchly Christian woman teaching me how to be Jewish, but keeping it a secret. I usually played alone because there were no children around the farm and I had no toys. My favorite pastime was picking the wild, brightly colored flowers at the side of the road and making flower crowns for my matka and myself. In the summer, I meandered in the garden among the fruit trees and the flowers, picked fresh cherries right off the tree. And I was with my matka and her beautiful blonde, blue-eyed daughter Stanka one gorgeous day when some German soldiers entered the garden. Stanka said, "Show the soldiers how you sing and dance." And the soldiers echoed, "Sing for us, dance for us. We'll give you cukierki," which means candy in Polish. Somewhat shyly, I obliged them. They could have eradicated my life right then and there, but they allowed me to live another day. One day, I innocently entered the barn, and there I saw 2 legs in the hay. I ran into the house, screaming wildly, "There are Jews in the barn! There are Jews in the barn!" I had no idea what the word Jews meant, but I guess because of the conversations I heard around me, I thought it was something to be afraid of. "I took care of them, don't worry," said Matka. It wasn't until many years after I left Poland that I came to understand what she meant. There had been 2 Jewish women in the barn, a 13-and-a-half-year-old girl, Marilla Friedman, and her mother, Malka Friedman, that she was also hiding. But Matka's husband, Michał, drank heavily, and she was afraid that if he got drunk, he might reveal that they were hiding Jews in the barn, and the penalty in Poland for helping a Jew was death to the entire family. So she quickly transferred them to her attic space. Even her husband did not know. And they also survived the war. My bed was under a picture of the Blessed Mother, Mary, Mother of Jesus. I had seen it in church that I attended every Sunday with my matka. And more than once was I suddenly awakened in the middle of the night with a flashlight in my face. A flashlight held by those high-booted soldiers. How did they know where to go? Had someone led them to Mrs. Kowalczyk's in the hopes of getting a pound of sugar or a half a pound of butter as a reward for betraying a Jew? You know, the Germans gave rewards to anyone who would lead them to a Jew in hiding. "Show the soldiers how you say your prayers," my matka would say to me in front of that German soldier. Sleepy-eyed and terrified, I put my palms together, I thumped down on the cold, icy floor, and recited the prayer to the Holy Mother, the Matka Boska, in perfect Polish. The soldiers left. They found no Juden in the house that night. Spring and summer came and went, and it was time to cover my carefree bare feet with heavy socks and boots. The roads where the flowers had been were filled with snow up to my waist. The Christmas tree glowed brightly in the room where I slept. Beautiful decorations. And on the tree were also some bell-shaped and star-shaped cookies, green-sprinkled cookies. So if I got hungry in the middle of the night, I could help myself to an ornament. In the corner of the room, there was a pail, so I would not have to go outside in the frosty night. We did not have indoor plumbing. Soon I was old enough to attend school. Since I had not started my education with other children in the class, I had some makeup to do. I had to learn the entire Polish alphabet in 3 nights. I stayed up late into the night. I was frustrated. I cried. I tried. My matka helped me. And her patience actually helped me to learn the alphabet and even to learn to read. So when I was called up to the teacher's desk to read, I remember the teacher saying, "If she can do it, why can't the rest of you?" And kids got punished for any school infractions in Poland in the 1940s by having to sit in the back of the room with weights on their shoulders for the whole day. Or to sit in the back of the room on a tall stool with a pointy dunce cap on. I did not want to be any of those kids. May 1945, Kowalczyk household. War in Europe is over officially May 8th, 1945. A slightly familiar woman, my Aunt Noma, my father's youngest sister, enters with a beautiful doll and carriage for me. She speaks discreetly to my matka, words I cannot hear. And later I was to learn that my Aunt Noma escaped the hellfire by jumping off a stalled train on its way to the death camp Treblinka. Her husband did not make it. She was going to a DP camp, a displaced persons camp in Germany. The camp was called Farnwald. And there she met her second husband, William Schneiderman. So Hitler was gone, war was over. Matka made me a beautiful coat and hat, and she said, "We're going on a trip." I made sure to bring my doll, looks much happier than I do. And we went to a place called Jelena Góra, which means Yellow Mountain. It was a strange new place where a huge red windmill kept going around and around, and I loved to watch it. I did not realize how much my matka had grown to love me. She had promised my family that if somebody from my family came to get me, she would give me up. But what was she doing now? She was taking me to a remote place in the hope that I would not be found and that I could live with her forever. Now I want you to imagine that you are in Farnwald, the DP camp where my Aunt Noma is. She's in a large room with many survivors and American soldiers who are administering the camp and trying to help the survivors. Some of them, they all want to leave Europe. They lost their families, they lost their homes. They may have relatives in America or what was then Palestine, now Israel, or in South America. So these American soldiers were going to help them. So here's my Aunt Noma, very frustrated. Her eyes are darting all over the room. She wants to do something. What does she want to do? She wants to contact her older sister, my father's older sister, Esther Bernstein, who left Europe before the war. She wants to tell her she's alive and that I'm alive. Aunt Noma speaks Polish and Yiddish. And the American soldiers speak English. She doesn't know one word of English. She's hoping maybe there's an American soldier there from New York. So this is what she does. Brilliant. Esther, Max, Bernstein, Bronx, New York, she yells out about 3 times. Hoping that maybe there's a soldier there from New York. And there was. His name was Phil Kaplan. He was the next door neighbor of Esther and Max Bernstein. So he came over and spoke to her in his broken Yiddish. And then he sent a letter to his mother on Marshall Parkway in the Bronx. I found Mrs. Bernstein's sister, and her little niece is also alive. That's how I was found. Now imagine that you're at Yelena Góra watching the windmill with me. One day, two men arrive in what to me looks like a big box on wheels. I had never seen a car. There were only two cars in the entire town of Bend Grove. Everybody else, horse and wagon. The two men are representatives of the American Jewish Committee, obviously sent there by my Aunt Esther and Uncle Max, who did some research and hired a lawyer. No internet. The men entered the house and they speak to my matka something about America. And then they try to convince me to go into the car with them. They have wonderful adventures for me and cookies and chocolate in the car. And I said, can Matka come? And they said, no, we'll bring you back to Matka. I would only go if Matka came. She didn't. And they didn't bring me back. I was forcefully removed to the car, and I never saw my matka again. It was a nightmare. Traumatic separation from my matka yet again. Then my memory of ensuing events. After a few days, I found myself at an airport with another strange woman taking care of me. And this woman had terrible scratches on both cheeks, fresh scratches. I wondered where she got them, so I asked her. And she said a cat had done it. It didn't take me long to figure out. In my wild, uncontrollable, terrified moments, I had been that cat. I had done that to her. The next stop was an orphanage run by Lutheran nuns in Sweden. Everybody wore the same habits, the same headgear. Here I got a new name. Gucha became Guta, but I got my family name back. That's my third name. Here I learned to hate herring, which was served at every meal. And I learned to ride a two-wheeler. I'm sorry, that's my Aunt Esther and Uncle Max, who eventually became Mom and Pop. This is Sweden, so look at the two-wheeler. I'm 6.5 years old, no training wheels, but I learned. And I befriended this little boy. He was deaf and mute. I wonder what he had seen. And here I learned my first foreign language, Swedish, which of course was not going to be my last foreign language. A long ship voyage awaited me. Now I want you to imagine you are in the Bronx attending a wedding. At one table sits my Aunt Esther and Uncle Max, and at the same table is a family from Canada, Fanny and Abby Morantz. They had never met before. They're both from Eastern Europe. They're both in the meat business. My aunt says to them, I have a little girl coming from Europe. And at that time, 47, that was fairly common. She said, it's my brother's youngest child. And she can't come directly to the United States. She has to be in Canada for 3.5 weeks until her immigration number comes up. Can you take her for those 3.5 weeks? I'll pay all the expenses. They had never met before. And they said, of course. December 1947, nauseating crossing of the rough ocean. I was seasick the whole time. This was a ship that was filled with children who had one thing in common. Not one of them was with his or her parents. They were all orphans. The ship was the Aquitania. And on it was this dark curly-haired youngster with her cardboard suitcase filled with ill-fitting clothing, in which I had my most precious possession, which my matka had put in, and that was a picture of Jesus. She put it in there for good luck. The picture of Jesus had been a constant in my life, unchanging, source of security for me. So, the Victoria train station was a busy place in Montreal, and waiting for me were about 15 unfamiliar people, including this family, Fanny and Abby Morantz. My aunt picked me out of a line of kids. There she is, there's my brother's little girl. She was able to locate me through the American Jewish Committee, which sent those two men to Yelena Gora after my aunt met Phil Kaplan, the soldier who lived next door. So this woman with the same first name as my natural mother was going to become my third and last mother, but I had to go to Fanny Morantz and Abby. My Aunt Fanny, to this day, she was only going to be my mother for 3.5 weeks. However, what was to be 3.5 weeks turned into 3.5 years. And what happens when you stay with somebody for 3.5 years? You grow to love each other. Life was teeming with possibilities, growth, new family, friends. And Fanny's daughter Shirley said, Gucha, Guta, what kind of names are these? Your name is Gloria. And that's how I became Gloria. And then I got two new, quote, sisters and a brother. I became an aunt as a 9-year-old to Fanny's grandchildren. I became a bit of a polyglot. I already spoke Swedish and Polish, and in Canada I learned French, English, Hebrew, and Yiddish. So at age 8, I was speaking 6 languages. I'm happy I can get English out now. And of course, I wanted to continue speaking Polish because Fanny was fluent in it, even though I knew English by the time 2 or 3 months had passed. I was pretty fluent in it. So Fanny's younger daughter, Rita, said, Passover is coming, Pesach is coming, no Polish allowed in this house. So I began to speak English. The Morantz family cherished their Jewish heritage. You could hear Uncle Aby, an observant Jew, chanting Torah in the synagogue, traditional music on the holidays, festivals. So imagine their surprise when a little girl showed up at their house with her most treasured possession, a picture of Jesus. But somehow that picture just ceased to be precious. It disappeared without any trauma for me. The richness and variety of my own Jewish tradition replaced it. The family celebrations, the seders, visits to the synagogue, all helped me to embrace my new religion, which of course was my old religion. Grand Central Station, New York, April 5th, 1951. 3.5 years have passed. It is time to leave the Morantz family. By the way, I became Gloria Morantz after them, so that was my fourth name. This was a very difficult parting. I grew to love this family and did not want to leave them. There was only one good thing about leaving, was that I could go back and visit. And I left in April. By November, Thanksgiving break, I was back there and have been back there many, many times for weddings, funerals, holidays, anything. They are still my family. I speak to whoever's left very regularly. So I went to my Aunt Esther and Uncle Max in New York, who became Mom and Pop. And their sons became my brothers, and I became a Bernstein. From teen to adulthood, the journey continued, and another name awaited me when I met my husband, Miles. I became Gloria Glantz. Last name, no more names after that. We have 2 wonderful children, Craig and Jordana, and now we are blessed with 5 grandchildren, Maxwell, Emerson, Kenzie, Lexi, and Judah. My life's work became molding young minds as a teacher, but my passion became keeping the story of the Holocaust alive. I teach children and adults the lessons of man's inhumanity to man, and about the hate and indifference that led to it, in the hope that it will not happen to anybody again. Unfortunately, that's still only a hope, not a reality. After presenting a Holocaust program in school, one of my students asked the following question: if you could speak to your real mother and father for 3 minutes, what would you say to them? I responded, "You and your pain are not forgotten. The suffering of our people is not forgotten. The Jewish people still lives. Am Yisrael Chai. You have 2 beautiful grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren who will pass on our heritage. They are humane, intelligent, and delightful. You would have loved them dearly, and they missed not having you as grandparents. You would have been proud of me, your youngest child. I have a rich and full life, filled with love and friendship and family. I have been blessed with good health and abundant educational opportunity. My work enables me to make a difference in children's lives. In addition, Mother, my life is filled with music, a gift from you. You are alive in my heart, always." Some more pictures. Top left, it's hard for me to see this, but maybe I can. Okay, where is this thing? Oh, okay. That's my grandma, and next to her is my Aunt Norma, who jumped off the train, and 2 of my uncles and an aunt. My grandpa Pinchas, he was beaten up by some Polish thugs before he had to go to the camp. My Aunt Norma with her second husband, William Schneiderman, he escaped from Treblinka. She lived to 90 in America, and he lived to 97. My mother, Esther Przepurka. I am putting a yahrzeit candle stone next to Wegrow in Treblinka. My father, Mendel Przepurka, Esther and Max. my family before I was born. That looks like a Sabbath table. And my matka. The blessings and the continuity. Some of the kids are older now. I have to get new pictures. My son Craig and his wife Katie. And the Olympic champion is my granddaughter Lexi and her brother Judah, who can't sit still for a minute. My husband Miles and I. Our daughter Jordana and her husband Kevin. Their 3 children, Maxwell and his twin sisters Emerson and Kenzie, and they are identical, so you know the trouble I have. People in the attic. So this lady is the 13-year-old girl, Marilla Friedman, who was also hidden. This gentleman is her brother, Arnold, who had false baptismal certificate and was out in the open, and he would come visit his sister and me at the Kowalczyks. This gentleman is his older brother, who also had false papers, Morris. He knew my father, and he said, "Your father always had a joke or a story to tell." And I told this to our son Craig, who was exactly like his grandfather, and his tears came down his eyes. And this lady is the wife of Arnold. She's also a survivor. The Friedmans went back to visit Matka. This is the barn where his mother and sister were hidden. This is Stanka, and this is my Matka. And this is Arnold Friedman. In 1978, the Friedmans went to visit Matka. And this is her husband, Michal. This is Matka. This is, when I left, they found such a void in their lives, they adopted a little baby. Unfortunately, he did not turn out to be Gittel Shapurka. He was a drug addict, an alcoholic, and died young. This is Marilyn Marilla, 13-and-a-half-year-old girl. And here is Stanka holding my picture. I left them in 46. This is 78. She's still holding my picture. So you know what that shows. In 2013, I had the opportunity to host an event for over 500 people because I was finally able to name my matka as a righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. And this is her certificate. Can one person make a difference? As a result of Maria and Michal Kowalczyk, all the people standing here would not be here if not for them, plus some are missing. Can one person make a difference? I thank you. I will be happy to entertain any questions or comments from you. Anybody? You're not being graded. Yes. I've been to Poland, but I never went back to visit my matka. Is that what you want? Is that what you want to know? Okay. All right. Well, I didn't have an option. I came to Canada. I was 8 years old. I wanted to write a letter to my matka. The philosophy at that time was Forget your past, go on with your life. That's behind you, you got to move on. I was 8 years old, okay? I wrote a letter to the King of Sweden, thanking him for his hospitality. He never answered me. I came to New York, I was 12. I said to my Aunt Esther, I want to write to Matka. We don't have her address. You go on with your life. That was in the past. I think today things would have been different. They would have allowed me to do it. I met the Friedman family in the 1990s. She was still alive. When I met them, I composed a letter that I wanted them, because I lost my Polish very quickly. They still spoke Polish and they still had contact with her. I took a picture of my 2 kids, who were like 5 and 7, and I asked them to write to her, and they said they would. In 1991, there was a Hidden Child meeting in New York City. I met them there. I said, did you write to Matka? They said no. I said, why? Well, we thought it would hurt her more because all these years you hadn't contacted her. They took that upon themselves. Now, I'm kicking myself. I could have gone to the Polish consulate or someplace and composed that, but I didn't. So that was a hole in my heart all along. And so it was very important for me to get her honored, because that I could do. And now the world will know what a person she was.
Was she still alive?
No, she was not alive anymore. And no family members either. Her daughter predeceased her, her husband predeceased her. Anybody else?
Did you always live in New York City from the time that you got here?
From the time that I came to New York, yes, I've always lived in New York City, yes. Yes. Yeah, did my mother have a personal relationship with my matka? Michał, her husband, was a custodian at my father's factory. And they had a very good relationship. My father had lent him money, and they had a nice relationship. So my parents knew the Kowalczyks. I did not know them, but obviously my mother must have sensed that she would be a kind person, and she was. Yes?
I'm very moved by your talk, and thank you very much for sharing such information. I'm just wondering, I mean, it's easy to do it here in Downstate. We are a very receptive, easy group, I would imagine, to give it to. Do you go into areas where this message may have a different kind of reception, where people may not be as receptive to it as a human organism?
Okay. The question was, have I gone anywhere where the reception is not as warm as it is here? You know, I have always had very positive responses everywhere I went. And I've spoken at the Virginia War Museum in Washington, D.C. I've spoken to 5th graders, to 90-year-olds. I've spoken at churches. I've spoken in synagogues, in front of Muslim communities. I've spoken in so many different areas, and I have never had a negative response. I have always had a positive response. One response I'll tell you, the first time I gave a talk to 5th grade students at the Shelter Rock School in Manhasset, where I taught, and when I first started and I said, my mother left me with this woman, and this little boy, a little African-American boy, jumped out of his seat, didn't even raise his hand. He just jumped out of his seat, and he said, your mother left you? That's terrible. And then he sat down, and he listened to the rest of it. And at the end, he raised his hand very, very gingerly, and he said, your mother was a hero. So he got it. Anybody else? Yes? Yes, fairly certain. My town, Wegrow, became a ghetto. And a lot of smaller towns neighboring also went into that town. You know, ghettos was a place where the Germans sort of consolidated the population. It wasn't an enclosed ghetto like the Warsaw Ghetto or Lodz or something, but, and we were only 12.5 miles from Treblinka. So when that ghetto was emptied, and it was Yom Kippur, 1942, that's where they went. Except my father, as I showed you my father's death certificate, this is my conjecture, I don't have proof, I think the Germans took over all businesses. Jews were not allowed to own any businesses. Now my father had a very thriving leather factory. You know how they loved their leather, those beautiful boots. So obviously could have come over to him, this is our factory now, get out of here, this is no longer your factory, and he probably gave them lip, and so they killed him. That's my conjecture, because he was killed the year before the ghetto was liquidated. My grandpa Pinchas, he was beaten up and died of his wounds before he went. So I think most of my family went to Treblinka, including my parents and my mother and my brothers. Yeah. A few of my family members were hidden. My Aunt Norma, when she escaped, she went to find one of my uncles who was hidden by another righteous Christian who had a restaurant, and he was hidden underground. You know, there were no refrigerators. It was like an ice cellar where they kept ice. And my Uncle Fischel was hidden there, and he became very ill. And he died there, and she said she buried him with her own hands. One of my aunts committed suicide, my Aunt Pearl. I read that in Sefer Zikaron, which is a book of memory that was put together by my cousin in Israel about the different things that happened to our family. Okay. Yes? Oh, I knew that was coming because I was just going to say that. You know, in Europe it was a tradition for people who had relatives here to take a picture of themselves, and on the back was a postcard. And they would send it to their families. So when my Aunt Esther died, I found in her dining room drawer all these postcards of my brother, of my father, of my mother, all these postcards that was sent to her with an address, zum Eindenken, you know, just for the memory for my Schwester, for my sister, and the children, and so forth. One of them was really hysterically funny because I looked at it, I don't remember which one it was, but it had the address written in the Yiddish Hebrew letters. So I'm saying to myself, how did the mailman know where to deliver it? So somebody in the audience says, well, he must have been Jewish. He probably could read it. That picture of my matka and me, I just found that in 2007. It was like attached on the back of one of those bigger photographs of my family. And it just fell on the ground. It's the only picture I've had. The other pictures the Friedmans provided me with, you know, the barn and so forth.
Thank you very much. Incredibly powerful story.
Thank you. Say the last part again. What's the obligation? Oh. Okay. So why do I do this? I do this because I don't want to have my family die a second time. I want people to know that there was a Shapurka family. I want people to know that people did things even though it was in danger to their lives. My matka could have been killed, okay? And I also want to show acts of kindness work. And all of us, hopefully will never have to do these kinds of choices. But we have choices in life. You know, kids today, and I worry about my grandchildren, Kids are bullied all the time. They're taunted, they're bullied on cyberspace, tremendously bullied. And I just feel that it's very important for us to know that we can make a difference by our actions. Your actions can help someone or hurt someone, you know. So basically, I think those are the lessons that we all need to take away. In a small way, any small act that you can do for someone will be remembered by them as a great act. You may think it's nothing, but if you put your hand on somebody and say, come, let's have lunch together, somebody who is ostracized by a group, that person will remember you for life.
I'd like to thank Gloria again for coming and share her story, and on behalf of SUNY Downstate, I'd like to thank you
Beautiful.
for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending.